African Reserve Bank. Is it? Wait. The South African Reserve Bank has, over the past decade, committed to the enhancement of interoperability in the national payment system. So basically, the concept of interoperability over the past decade, the concept of interoperability has been one of the objectives, or rather say objectives of the South African Reserve Bank. South African Reserve Bank what you doing? What you doing? What language is that? What you doing? Shri Yangan, hello. Over the past decade, the concept of interoperability has been one of the objectives of the South African Reserve Bank. Directives. Are you drawing? Oh, I wish I'm not good at drawing. I'm not studying. I am a little bit not studying. What can I say? What am I doing? I have a deadline, a thesis proposal deadline. So what I'm doing right now is reviewing the thesis before submitting it, probably tomorrow or on Tuesday. Hi there, hello. Tell me, where are you from and what time is it over there? Here in South Africa is 3:33 a.m. right now. Like, let's start with the country. Where are you from? If you're from South Africa, perfect, good. What time is it where you're from? Then I will, hi there, hello, dark corner to sleep. So over the past decade, the concept of interoperability has been one of the objectives of the South African Reserve Bank's directive. So this commitment was reflected in the publication of the position paper on interoperability, so which supported payment systems that give preference to generally accepted international standards as opposed to proprietary standards, and payment systems that conform to uniform and open standards that lay the foundation for interoperability between payment products and systems. Ankh, hi there. Ankh, can't. Like can't as in like can't, or can't as in can't. You know, when people insult you and then they say can't. To be honest, I'm never offended by insult, because I'm the person who thinks like if someone insults you, you can insult them back, you know. I think like, why would you be offended if you can do the same thing? If someone insults you, insult them back. It's easy. And the best insult is always insulting someone's mother. If someone insults you unbothered and you have never offended that person, you can just insult them with their mother or their father, their parents actually. I think that hits deeper. But some people can be rude nowadays, you know, people, they don't know you, and then you say something online, something that is innocent, and then they just decide to insult you, and then you insult them back. You know, you don't be a Samaritan. It doesn't help. Hello, Jacques Har. Wow, how do I even say the name? Jacques Hart Lou. Okay. Have you ever written something and your supervisor tells you to use your own words? This is me trying to search my own words. Okay, the first paragraph reads, the South African Reserve Bank has over the past decade committed to the enhancement of interoperability in the national payment system. Right? So over the past decade, the concept of interoperability has been one of the objectives of the South African Reserve Bank directives. So the objective or we can say something like um The South African Reserve Bank has has been committed to the enhancement of interoperability in the national payment system. So the South African Reserve Bank has been committed, right? It has been committed to the enhancement of interoperability in the national payment system. Hello, Jacquees, you're not saying anything. I'm saying hello, how are you? How are you? Are you a woman, a man? How are you? Hello. Hello. So, okay. The South African Reserve Bank has, over the past decade, committed to the enhancement of interoperability in the national payment system. So this goes to tell you that interoperability has been a serious concept that the South African Reserve Bank has established. So we're not going to go further, not further, but we're not going to go to where it all began, because if we do that, we may lose the focus of the study. The most important thing is acknowledging that interoperability has been a concept of interest in the South African Reserve Bank's directives, right? So, how do we know that? This commitment was reflected in the publication of the position paper on interoperability. So we know that, right? We know that in 2011, position paper, okay? In 2011, so we have 2011, right? This year is 2026. But the concept of interoperability was not first introduced in the publication of the position paper on interoperability, the one which was published in 2011. The concept stretches back to probably 2007 or 2009 or 10. It stretches back to quite a few years ago. Okay, but the most interesting, or I would say the most important directive will be the position paper on interoperability, which was published in 2011. So this position paper on interoperability, right, supported payment systems that give preference to generally accepted international standards as opposed to proprietary standards. So, okay, it supported payment systems. These payment systems that give preference to generally accepted international standard as opposed to proprietary standard, and payment systems that conform to uniform and open standards that lay the foundation for interoperability between payment products and systems. So, the goal of the position paper on interoperability is clear. Over the past decade, the concept of interoperability has been one of the objectives of the South African Reserve Bank's directives. The South African Bank has been committed to the enhancement of interoperability in the national payment system. So, the commitment is reflected in the publication of the position paper on interoperability 2011, which underscored, of course, or which supported payment systems that give preference to generally accepted international standards as opposed to proprietary standards, and payment systems that conform to uniform and open standards that lay the foundation for interoperability between payment products and systems. Okay, so we understand right, the concept of interoperability and how important it has been. So the commitment to enhanced interoperability national payment system, which is NPS. And we have the position paper on interoperability 2011. Position paper on interoperability which supported payment systems that give preference to general accepted international standards. Okay. Position paper. Position paper. So the commitment to enhanced interoperability in the national payment system was further reinforced in the National Payment System Framework and Strategy, which is Vision 2025. Fast forward 20 2018, the South African Bank published National Payment System Framework and Strategy. National Payment System. National Payment System Framework and Strategy, also known as Vision 2025. So what was the vision? Vision 2025. Okay. So this framework identified interoperability as a strategic priority at improving communication and interoperability between payment systems to prevent market fragmentation and promote a more harmonized and competitive payment ecosystem. So Vision 2025 identified interoperability as a strategic priority aimed at improving communication and interoperability between payment systems to prevent market fragmentation and promote a more harmonized and competitive payment ecosystem. Okay. Okay. Okay, so it is clear that interoperability, besides being important, okay, so these are our sources. So more recently, the South African Reserve Bank published the consultation paper on interoperability in the national payment system. So South African Reserve Bank published the consultation paper on interoperability in the national payment system. This is a consultation paper on interoperability in the national payment system. This was done it cannot be. Oh, it is. This consultation paper was published last year. Okay. Consultation paper. On interoperability National Payment System, also known as consultation paper. Okay, more recently. Okay, so more recently, the South African Reserve Bank published the consultation paper on interoperability in the national payment system, which aims to promote the achievement of interoperability envisioned in Vision 2025, thus enabling a more interoperable, efficient, inclusive, and competitive national payment system. So it aims to promote the achievement of interoperability envisioned in Vision 2025, thus enabling a more interoperable, efficient, inclusive, and competitive national payment system. So, the consultation paper aims to promote the achievement The question is, were the goals on interoperability envisioned in Vision 2025, have those goals been achieved? Can we now say that the communication and interoperability between payment systems in South Africa has been improved? Okay. Significantly, however, the said consultation paper excludes cross-border payment. Significantly, however, the said consultation paper expressly excludes cross-border payment interoperability from its scope. So this exclusion raises an important legal question as to whether South Africa's financial law currently establishes enforceable legal principles governing cross-border payment interoperability within the national payment system. This exclusion raises an important legal question. So, we know more recently the South African Reserve Bank published the consultation paper on on interoperability in the national payment system, which aims to promote the achievement of interoperability envisioned in Vision 2025, thus enabling a more interoperable, efficient, inclusive, and competitive national payment system. Significantly, however, the said consultation paper expressly excludes cross-border payment interoperability from its scope. This exclusion raises an important legal question as to whether South Africa's financial law currently establishes enforceable legal principles governing cross-border payment interoperability within the national payment system. To be clear, for clarity, for clarity, so this exclusion raises an important legal question as to whether South Africa's financial law currently establishes enforceable legal principles governing cross-border payment interoperability within the national payment system. So, for clarity, for clarity, It thus raises an important legal question as to whether South Africa's financial law currently establishes enforceable legal principles governing cross-border payment interoperability within the national payment system. Okay, fine. So, the South African Reserve Bank describes interoperability as the capacity of payment service providers (PSPs) So this is where the legal argument becomes interesting, because the South African Reserve Bank is not saying that cross-border interoperability is unimportant. Rather, it is saying this consultation paper is not dealing with it. That is a subtle but important distinction. Let's unpack it step by step. Step one: what problem is the South African Reserve Bank trying to solve? What problem is the South African Reserve Bank trying to solve? The consultation paper observes that many payment service providers, PSPs, okay, payment service providers, payment service providers, PSPs, so many payment service providers. The South Africa's Reserve Bank describes interoperability as the capacity of payment service providers payment service providers and payment system participants. PSPs, payment system participants. What is the abbreviation of that? The consultation observes that many payment service providers and banks communicate using proprietary APIs, non-standardized payment messages, and different technical standards. In simple terms, imagine 5 banks, each speaking a different language. Bank A speaks English, Bank B speaks French, Bank C speaks German, Bank D speaks Spanish, Bank E speaks Portuguese. If a fintech wants to connect to all 5 banks, it must learn 5 different languages. That is expensive, that is inefficient, that discourages competition. Very important. The South African Reserve Bank describes interoperability as the capacity of payment service providers and payment system participants to transact across different platforms and networks in a manner that promotes efficiency, accessibility, innovation, and competition. Competition is emphasized a lot. competition. NB, competition is emphasized and then you have to analyze or connect this emphasis with the UK. With the UK analysis of the related problem. The South African Reserve Bank describes interoperability as the capacity of payment service providers and payment system participants to transact across different platforms and networks in a manner that promotes efficiency, accessibility, innovation, and competition. Similarly, the Committee on Payments and Market Infrastructures regards interoperability as the compatibility of payment 43 minutes. Regards what? Wait. Committee on Payments and Market Infrastructures also known as CPMI. So, similarly, the Committee on Payments and Market Infrastructures regards interoperability as the compatibility of payment systems that enables participants to clear and settle transactions efficiently across different infrastructures. Consequently, interoperability is not a merely technical characteristic of payment systems, but it may also operate as a regulatory mechanism capable of determining who may access financial infrastructure and on what legal terms. So, Mm, so this is reflected in the selected jurisdictions. So this is reflected so this is reflected in the selected jurisdictions jurisdictions which the study aims to draw lessons on with respect to cross border payment interoperability. So this is reflected in the selected jurisdictions to be discussed in the following paragraphs. This is reflected in the selected jurisdictions to be discussed in the following, which the study draws lessons from with respect cross-border payment infrastructure and access to the national payment system. Yes, the idea makes sense, but I will refine the wording as it stands in some sentences a little bit awkward for three reasons. This is reflected, this religion is vague. Clumsy. So this perspective okay. So this perspective, oh my goodness, this perspective is reflected in the regulatory Consequently, interoperability is not merely a technical characteristic of payment system, but it may also operate as a regulatory mechanism capable of determining who may access financial infrastructure and on what legal terms. So this perspective is reflected, of course, in the regulatory approaches adopted by the European Union, EU, the EU, the United Kingdom, UK, and Singapore, from which, did I say this study or this thesis? This study draws lessons for the regulation of cross-border payment interoperability and access to payment system infrastructure within the South African national payment system. So this consequently, interoperability is not merely a technical characteristic of payment systems, you understand that one, but it may also operate as a regulatory mechanism capable of determining who may access financial infrastructure and on what legal terms. This perspective is reflected in the regulatory approaches adopted by the European Union, the United Kingdom, and Singapore, from which this study draws lessons for the regulation of cross-border payment interoperability and access to payment system infrastructure within South African national payment system. So, fine. The legal significance of interoperability, particularly in the cross-border context, has become increasingly apparent with the digitalization of financial services. Modern financial systems are increasingly digital and platform-based. That is true. So, the legal significance of interoperability, particularly in the cross-border context, has become increasingly apparent with the digitalization of financial services. Modern financial systems are increasingly digital and platform-based. Nevertheless, even the most technologically advanced international payment platforms remain dependent upon domestic banking systems for settlement, clearing, liquidity management, and currency conversion. A practical illustration is provided by PayPal. In South Africa, PayPal users wishing to withdraw funds into a South African bank account must utilize the withdrawal services. The withdrawal service administered by First National Bank (FNB). Even where a customer does not bank with FNB, that customer must create an FNB online banking profile to facilitate the withdrawal of PayPal funds into South African bank account. This arrangement illustrates the extent to which cross-border payment platforms may remain dependent on regulated domestic. This arrangement illustrates the extent to which cross-border payment platforms may remain dependent on regulated domestic payment institutions for access to the national payment system and its underlying infrastructure. Moreover, it um, demonstrates demonstrates the importance of the legal analysis of the cross border payment interoperability in the national payment system, and also access to the interpret which has legal significance, the EU, and then okay. Your thesis draws lessons from those approaches. That is exactly on final point that avoids cross-border payment without access. Cross-border payment interoperability and access to payment system infrastructure. Access to payment system infrastructure. The idea is correct, but the second sentence can be expressed more naturally in a way that better reflects the legal focus of your thesis. As written, the importance of the legal. So this arrangement illustrates in which cross-border payment platforms may remain dependent on regulated domestic payment institutions for access to the national payment system and its underlying infrastructure. It also underscores, of course, the importance of examining whether South African law adequately regulates cross-border. Okay. Okay. So it also underscores the importance of examining whether the South African law adequately regulates cross-border payment interoperability and access to payment system infrastructure. So, regards in terms of interoperability, particularly in the cross-border context, has become increasingly apparent with the digitalization of financial services. Modern financial systems are increasingly digital and platform-based. Nevertheless, even the most technological advanced international payment platforms remain dependent upon domestic banking systems for settlement, clearing, liquidity, and currency conversion. Section 10, subsection 1, paragraph C of the South African Reserve Bank Act of 1989 is amended. National Payment System Act, Exchange Control Regulations. So, a practical illustration is provided by PayPal. In South Africa, PayPal users wishing to withdraw funds into a South African bank account must utilize the withdrawal series administered by First National Bank. Even where a customer does not bank with FNB, the customer must create an FNB online banking profile to facilitate the withdrawal of PayPal funds into a South African bank account. This arrangement illustrates the extent to which cross-border payment platforms may remain dependent on regulated domestic payment institutions for access to the national payment system and its underlying infrastructure. It also underscores the importance of examining whether South African law adequately regulates cross-border payment integrity and access to payment system infrastructure. This illustration okay. The PayPal example also raises questions concerning to the extent to which the South African Reserve Bank stated objectives regarding interoperability have been realized in the context of cross-border payments. So, as underscored In the position paper, the objective was to support payment systems that give preference to general accepted international standards over proprietary standards. Yet, where access to domestic payment infrastructure for cross-border payment platforms is dependent on a particular domestic banking institution and its associated arrangements, similar to the above paperless registration. Questions arise regarding the practical and legal implication of such dependence for interoperability, competition, and access to the national payment system. The paper example also raises questions concerning the extent to which the South African Reserve Bank's stated objectives regarding integrity have been realized in the context of cross-border payments. As underscored in the position paper, the objective was to support payment systems that give preference to general accepted international standards over proprietary standards. Yet, where access to domestic payment infrastructure for cross-border payment platform is dependent upon a particular domestic banking institution and its associated arrangements. Similar to the above paper illustration, questions arise regarding the practical and legal implications of such dependence for interoperability, competition, and access to the national payment system. Similarly, Vision 2025 identified enhanced interoperability as a means of improving communication between payment systems, preventing market fragmentation, and promoting a more harmonized and competitive payment ecosystem. The exclusion of cross-border payment interoperability from the scope of the consultation paper therefore raises a further question as to whether the interoperability objectives contemplated in Vision 2025 extend or were intended to extend to cross-border payment systems and service providers. Against this background, this thesis or this study examines whether South African financial established enforceable legal principle concerning cross-border payment interoperability within the national payment system. Specifically, it investigates whether the existing legal framework, including the National Payment System Act and related financial sector legislation, adequately regulates cross-border payment interoperability and the participation of cross-border payment service providers in the national payment system. So the thesis further examines the extent to which such participation is dependent upon intermediary banking institutions and the legal arrangements governing access to domestic payment infrastructure. In addressing these questions, the thesis evaluates whether the existing South African legal framework sufficiently promotes the objectives of interoperability, competition, accessibility, and financial inclusion in the cross-border payments context. It also considers whether the current framework creates legal uncertainty concerning the rights, obligations, and conditions applicable to cross-border payment service providers seeking to interact with or access the national payment system. Finally, the thesis draws lessons from the regulatory approaches adopted in the EU, the UK, and Singapore to evaluate whether elements of these frameworks may inform the future development of South African financial law and contribute to a more coherent regulatory framework for cross-border payment interoperability. Okay, for now, 6 of 10. do it too. We have lessons from the EU, the UK, and Singapore. 26 minutes in Singapore. On regulation, on the regulation. Lesson from the EU, the UK, and Singapore on the regulation. The regulation of cross-border payment, interoperability, and access to payment system infrastructure. Access to payment system infrastructure. Lessons from the EU, the UK, and Singapore on the regulation of cross-border payment, integrating access to payment system infrastructure. Payment. So this section examines the above mentioned This section examines the above-mentioned jurisdictions to identify lessons that may inform the regulation of cross-border payment, interoperability, and access to payment system infrastructure in South Africa. It considers the EU Directive PSD2 regime, the UK Open Banking Initiative, and Singapore's Payment Services Act. These jurisdictions have adopted different regulatory approaches to interoperability, access, and participation within their respective payment systems. Examining these approaches provides a basis for considering whether and to what extent elements of these regulatory frameworks may offer lessons for addressing the legal framework governing cross-border payment, interoperability, and access to payment system infrastructure within the South African national payment system. So first is the PSD2 regime in the EU. Why Chapter 2 exists. Once you understand its purpose, writing the full thesis becomes much easier. Hello. Once you understand its purpose, writing the full thesis becomes much easier. Think of your thesis as one big question. Your thesis asks, does South African law adequately regulate cross-border payment interoperability in the national payment system? Now imagine someone asks you, how do you know what adequate looks like? You cannot simply answer, I think it isn't adequate. How does one, how do you know what adequate looks like? You cannot simply answer, I think it isn't adequate. You need a benchmark. So what is chapter 2 really doing? It is not trying to prove that Europe, the UK, or Singapore have better laws. It is asking, how have other jurisdictions legally dealt with similar problems? Those answers become lessons, not models that South Africa must copy. Think of chapter 2 as saying, before deciding whether South African law has a gap, let's see how other jurisdictions regulate similar issues. Okay, so this section examines the above-mentioned jurisdictions to identify lessons that may inform the regulation of cross-border payment interoperability and access to payment system infrastructure in South Africa. It considers the EU Directive PSD2 regime. So, it considers the EU Directive PSD2 regime. See Article 66 to 67 of Directive of the European Parliament and of the Council. Okay. The UK Open Banking Initiative, UK Competition Markets Authority. UK Competition Markets Authority, Retail Banking Market Investigation Final Report, CMA 2016. No, this citation is not correct. It's a directive, so it needs to be cited similar to okay, let's see. The citation of this is wrong. Okay. Let's go to the site and see. Europa. So what is this thing called? So it's like a journal. So it has to be referenced in such a manner, in that manner. So it's called the actual name is so we will reference it like let's go back. Okay. A directive. International directive. So it will be Directive EU blah 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 of the European Parliament and the Council, and then who is the publisher? The publisher, wait. The publisher is the EU. EU what? Wait, let's see the PDF, what it looks like. PDF. Wait, why is it in this language? English. It's the official journal of the European Union. Okay. Okay. So it's going to be something like, okay, publisher, official journal of the European Union, official journal of the European Union, and then open brackets, we have the name is directive, in brackets, EU 2015 to 2366 of the European Parliament and of the Council close bracket, and then we have at 66 to 67, I think it's the page number. Can I see 66? Article 6. Different national practices concerning charging for the use of a given have led to extreme heterogeneity in the e-commerce and cross-border context. Merchants located where subcharging is allowed offer products and services in a member where subcharging is prohibited and subcharges the consumer. There are also many examples of merchants subcharging consumers at levels much higher than the cost borne by the merchant for the use of specific payment instrument. Well, I'm confused. While this directive organizes the elements of payment institutions, credit institutions remain the principal gateway for consumers to obtain payment instruments. The issuing of card-based payment instrument by payment service provider. Why is it so different from? Is this one right? I see 66 here. Oh. Hmm? Rules on access to payment account in the case of payment initiation services. Control C. So this one, Article 66. English. Article 66. Article 6. Rules on access to payment account in the case of payment initiation services. So, member states shall ensure that a payer has the right to make use of a payment initiation service provider to obtain payment services as referred to in point 7 on. The right to make use of a payment initiation service provider shall not apply with a payment account. Account saving payment service provider shall perform the actions specified in paragraph. But then it's the same, isn't it? EUR legs. EUR legs. Should we go with EUR legs? EUR legs. EUR. I want to write it OJEU, I have no idea. I think that's better. So, is this one the UK Open Banking Initiative 16? Which is the final report? Findings and adverse effects on competition. Remember the issue? So the matter was about competition. Okay, fine. Okay, it's fine. The UK Open Banking and Singapore's Payment Services Act. We need the link. Payment Services Act. I need the correct citation. PSA Singapore. Act number 2 of 2019 became law on 14th January. No, we need a link. Let's say Singapore. This is the link. Proposed amendments to payment services regulations. Oh no. Proposed amendments to Payment Services Regulations 2019, notices issued under the Payment Services Act 2019 or MAS, which is Monetary Authority of Singapore, and propose new regulations on exemptions for a specified period. Ciao. Oh, we have the link. It's here finally. Copy. Why? Okay, let's just click on it. Oh, Singapore Statutes Online. Oh, they have amended it. It's no longer 2019. Republic of Singapore Government Gazette Act Supplement published by authority. Wait. Let's see. Date of commencement is this one, Act 2 of 2019. Okay. Okay, copy C. Go back. The payment. The PSA. Okay. So these jurisdictions have adopted different regulatory approaches to interoperability, access, and participation within their respective payment systems. Examining these approaches provides a basis for considering whether and to what extent elements of these regulatory frameworks may offer lessons for addressing the legal framework governing cross-border payment, interoperability, and access to payment system infrastructure within the South African National Payment System. Let's start with the PSD2 regime in the EU. PSD2 regime in the EU. Ciao. Trust me. The EU, the EU, the EU. What problem was the EU trying to solve? So what happened in the EU is that banks controlled customers' payment accounts. The PSD2 regime provides a relevant example of a regulatory framework that establishes legal mechanisms governing third-party access to payment account services and payment initiation. So PSD2 So fintechs couldn't easily interact with banks. Banks could simply say no or use our system. My banks could simply say no. The EU said no, the law itself will decide. So PSD2 created legal rights. Banks must allow licensed third parties to access payment accounts under specified conditions. Okay. So PSD2 builds on the 2007 Payment Services Directive and expands the regulatory framework applicable to payment services within the EU, including through provisions governing payment initiation services, account information services, and the secure access of third-party providers to payment accounts. These provisions are relevant to the South African context because they demonstrate how legislation may regulate the interaction between payment service providers, which is PSPs now. Your PSPs. We have to join the gym. My back is killing me. How legislation may regulate the interaction between payment service providers through legally defined access requirements and technical and security standards. Legally defined access requirements. Finito. Let's focus on the access requirements. Access requirements. So let's talk about the Article 67. What is it? Article 67. Where are you? Article 67. Just a PSD2 here. PSD2. Oh, we have a reverse payment services directive from European Central Bank. Oh, there are many places you can access these things. Okay, let's go to redirect. Can find it under the European Union Eurolex. What time is it? Rules on access to payment account in the case of payment initiation services. Rules on access to and use of payment account information in the case of account information services. Okay. So now we're going to do articles 66 and 67. So, third-party access to payment account services. Okay. So, Articles 66 and 67 of PSD2 establish a legal framework for third-party access to payment account services. Article 66 regulates payment initiation services and requires payment account servicing payment service providers to allow payment initiation service providers to provide their services in accordance with the conditions prescribed by the directive. Article 67 similarly regulates account information services and provides for access to payment account information by account information service providers, subject to conditions established by PSD2. The provisions therefore establish a statutory framework governing the interaction between account servicing payment service provider and authorized or registered third-party providers, just like TTPs. Third-party providers. Rather than leaving such interactions solely to contractual arrangements between the parties. The significance of this framework for the South African context lies in the manner in which it legally structures third-party participation. Oh, what is this? 2.11. Okay, let's do like this. 2.1.3. No, 2, sorry. 2 and then 3. So what do we say? Lessons for South Africa. Okay, lessons for South Africa. Third-party provider authorization and access. Authorization and registration of third-party. Wait. Third-party provider authorization and access. TTP. Authorization. Wait. And then this part must come after. Okay, let's do like this. Okay, it must come here. Okay. Then we have lessons for South Africa, which is 2.1.23. And then this one, remove here. It's going to be 2. Which is third-party provider authorization and access. Okay, so PSD2 further establishes a regulatory framework for entities providing payment initiation services. Providing payment initiation services and account information services. Payment The payment initiation services, account information services. So it's like, okay, let's just write it full, no abbreviation for now. Do they have abbreviations? Let's see. Do they use abbreviations? They don't. No abbreviation. Where specific payment instrument is used for the purpose of giving consent, the payer and the payer's payment service provider may agree on spending limits for payment transactions executed through that payment instrument. Okay, it's fine. No abbreviation. So payment initiation service providers and account information service providers are subject to authorization or registration requirements under the directive depending on the nature of the services provided. Is it so? Article 5 to 6, 11 to 33. What do you say? So the framework establishes a regulated pathway through which non-bank entities may provide specified payment services and interact with payment account service providers subject to applicable regulatory requirements. So the PSD2 framework therefore demonstrates how legislation may facilitate third-party participation by defining the legal status of providers, like prescribing conditions applicable to their activities and regulator oversight of their interaction with payment account servicing providers. For South Africa, the relevant lesson is not necessarily that the PSD2 model should be adopted in its entirety, but rather that a statutory framework may provide greater legal certainty concerning the participation of non-bank providers. So the PSD will consequently provides a useful reference point for assessing the South African legal position, in which it raises questions of whether the South African legal framework provides sufficiently clear and enforceable mechanisms governing the participation of third-party and cross-border payment service providers and their ability to interact with domestic payment infrastructure. It further provides a basis for considering whether legal requirements concerning access, technical integrity, and regulatory oversight could contribute to addressing the integration barriers associated with proprietary APIs and non-standardized payment interfaces identified by the South African Reserve Banks. So we have lessons for South Africa. So the significance of this framework for South African context lies in the manner in which it legally structures third-party participation in the payment services. This is particularly relevant in light to the South African Reserve Bank observation that proprietary APIs and non-standardized payment messages may restrict third-party from integrating their systems with those of banks and may create difficulties for third parties seeking to connect to multiple banks. PSD2 provides a regulatory example of how legislation may establish defined conditions for third-party access and interaction with payment account servicing providers, while simultaneously subjecting such access to regulatory and security requirements, to regulatory requirements. Okay, we can just leave it like that for now. Now let's go to let's go to 2.2. The UK open banking and cross-border interoperability. Open banking and cross-border interoperability. Open banking and what? Cross-border payment interoperability. Yo. Cross-border payment